Geert, I just read an article, and it's not the first time that I read such an article about companies that were in the cloud big time with a lot of infrastructure there, and they are moving back. They are moving back to on-premises data centers because they say that cloud costs are getting out of hand, getting unpredictable, uncontrollable, and they are just moving back. So
yeah, I've read that as well. I think it's not really a trend yet, but it's some loud minority that doesn't have certain things under control. And what you see is a really big uprise in a thing called FinOps that actually tries to get things like cloud control, cloud cost under control. So maybe it's good to make a podcast out of that.
Shall we do a podcast on FinOps then?
Yeah, let's make an episode.
Okay.
The Lead Podcast, a podcast for leaders in engineering, architecture, and development.
So, why do you think that, well, in the first place, cloud costs are getting out of hand nowadays? Why is this now suddenly?
Yeah, what I think when we started moving to the cloud years ago, or some companies are still in the progression towards cloud, is traditionally when a lot of companies moved to the cloud, they did this in the same fashion as they did with a data center. It's just yet another data center.
Yeah, so they just moved VMs and
also
for 24/7.
And also, the people responsible for cost were the same people who were responsible for the cost within the data center. Because in the data center, they knew exactly what it cost. And, well, they tried to use the same processes in the cloud. But as we all know, or should know maybe, is the cloud really excels when we give autonomy to teams.
Yeah, so what we always say, cloud and DevOps, they go hand in hand. You cannot do cloud without DevOps because you need to have the autonomy. You build it, you run it. You need to create your own infrastructure. You need to choose your own infrastructure. Yeah. But DevOps can also not go without cloud because you cannot do fully DevOps if you have to put a ticket for everything that you want into a ticket system and let everybody else do it.
Yeah, you want to have the autonomy and the automation, everything in place at the team level, so that you can build it and run it, do the whole thing. What this also changes is a form of control. If you build all the infrastructure, if you run the infrastructure, well, you should own that infrastructure and also own the cost of that infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think that in the early days, or maybe not in the early days, but in an on-premises data center, there was always this organic limit. So if you want to deploy a new application, well, you need to request a server. If there is no server left because all servers were full, you need to buy a new server. So then you had to go to procurement, you need to buy a new server. So there was always like, or the IT pro department said, well, the servers are full. Can you not make a smaller application? Can you not share a server? Or we need to buy a server. Why is this server needed? Is the server not too expensive, etc., etc.? So it was always this form of control that is now completely disappeared because you can just deploy 20 servers if you like.
Yeah, and if you have to go to someone else to arrange it, it's often easier to just add it to the existing server, right? So the ease of doing those kind of things has become a lot easier in the cloud. And I think over the last few years, more and more companies actually embraced this. So they gave that freedom to these teams, so they could actually get the real benefits of the cloud.
Yeah, and I think that if I look at the people around me and also in companies that I work with, is that the people that actually deploy all the infrastructure and stuff, so the developers or the DevOps teams, they do not really feel that cost management is part of their role description. And I think personally that it should be, because it's about them now. they are creating infrastructure, so they should be responsible for maintaining the infrastructure, but also for the cost it incurs in terms of, running the infrastructure and spinning up all kinds of resources that you might or might not need in the end, and using the benefits of the cloud where it all scales.
Yeah, I think that's where really FinOps comes from, where companies move to this model where the teams got freedom to do certain things, maybe within certain boundaries, but they were not handed the responsibility for their own cost yet.
Yeah.
So then, my application is a bit slow. I can just put a little bit bigger database under it, right? So it will perform better again.
Yeah, or just simple like, I need a new web application with a storage account and maybe a firewall in front of it. So next, finish, default options, and go. And the default options are usually not the cheapest options, and especially not the options that you might need in a development environment.
Yeah.
But you keep mentioning this term called FinOps. So what is FinOps? What is it about? Is it the new DevOps, or is it the new DevSecOps, or what is it?
No, I think it's a way of managing your cost and putting cost in the center of your processes to give people the knowledge and the capabilities of being in control of their cost. There's an official or maybe official explanation. I will just read it. So FinOps is an evolving cloud financial management discipline and cultural practice that enables organizations to get the maximum business value by helping engineering, finance, technology, and business teams to collaborate on data-driven spending decisions.
Yeah,
so that's a mouthful.
That's a mouthful, but I think there is important things here to talk a little bit about, because I think that one of the things that I really like about this whole FinOps principle is that one of the questions that we always get asked in the beginning: how can we save cost? How can we reduce cost? How can we run more optimally? Which are, of course, very valid questions. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the definition of FinOps, never ever it says something about saving cost. It is about maximum business value. Yeah. And although the two are of course related, it is really about how can you run more efficiently with your resources that you have to get more business value. And what I also like about this definition is that it's not an engineering practice. It's really bringing finance and business and technology together, and the data-driven spending decisions. Because I think that is one of the things that is really, really lacking in most organizations. They have cloud, and of course you will get a bill at the end of the month. But that's at the end of the month. And as we all know, cloud is very, very volatile. Things happen in milliseconds, in hours, in minutes. So at the end of the month, looking at the end result is not very handy.
No, but really getting insights, good insights, detailed insights, that's the starting point. Then you can have conversations about costs versus benefits. Then you can have all kinds of discussions on, hey, maybe we should re-architect this application so we only actually spend costs when we use this application instead of having it run all the time. The cloud gives you a lot of capabilities to optimize, but first you need to know what you're doing.
And I think it's also very important to start looking at multiple perspectives. So if you are talking about the cloud is too expensive, which is a statement I hear sometimes, that's actually a very hollow statement, because the cloud is too expensive compared to what? So if you see your cloud cost rising, that is maybe a signal that is becoming more and more expensive. But do you also have insights in, for example, the revenue that comes from cloud? So
Yeah.
if your revenue is double the amount of your cloud cost, is
Yeah,
it
you're
then
doing good.
is it then still a problem that your cloud costs are rising? But not always is that perspective brought into the equation, that we are also looking at revenue, or maybe at the expected cost versus the revenue, or versus the actual cost. So what did we actually expect? Because if you can say the cloud is too expensive, but if you never had a baseline or an idea of what it should cost, or what you will allow it to cost, then what are you actually saying? So I think one of the first things when starting with doing FinOps, we need to start thinking about visibility. And then first we need to understand a little bit better what we are talking about if we are talking about cloud spend. So what is cloud spend and what can we do about it?
Yeah, so also knowing which workload uses what. So we can also see like a certain workload having a form of revenue, of return on investment. So we actually know that it's worthwhile to run this workload in this way.
Yeah. So but that is actually quite a big step to go from I have a bill with a total amount of dollars on it to I know exactly what this workload costs or this product, and by the way, the revenue that we get is actually from this specific product. So that is maybe the ideal situation where you want to move to.
Yeah.
But first, in many cases, we need to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And understanding a little bit better about
where the cost is coming from.
Yeah, what is the cloud spend? So and I like this simple multiplier thing that there is very simple. Cloud spend is the usage multiplied by the rate, and that seems very open door and obvious, but it's actually quite interesting, because if we're looking at usage is something that you can really influence. That is normally done by, if we do DevOps, by the DevOps teams. They are using cloud resources. So, for example, compute power. Which type of VM do you choose? Which web applications queue do you have? What storage account SKU do you use? Do you use a premium? Where do you store it? What is the redundancy? What is the latency? How many IP addresses? What kind of API management, etc. So all the choices that you make in terms of architecture, but also in terms of how fast, how scalable, how reliable, all these things come into the equation.
Yeah.
And have an influence on your cost.
Yeah, so it starts with first having the capability of specifying the different details.
Yes.
And who is using those different resources. And based on that, you can start having the conversation with the teams owning or using those resources in, are we using this in the right way?
Yeah. So because what you often see, and that is how we are programmed in the past, a development environment should resemble the test environment, should resemble the acceptance environment, should resemble the production environment, which is of course very nice. But if you are in the cloud and you have a premium storage disk, whatever, to do your work, that costs you 5,000 euros a month, do you actually need that zone redundant, geographically backup storage account that is very fast on your development environment as well? Yeah. Or can you do with a storage account that is only locally redundant and not so fast? Yeah. Probably you can, and that will save you maybe $1,000 per storage account. So the choices that a team needs to make are also a little bit different, and you really need to start looking at what is production and what is non-production, and do I actually need all the production resources also in my non-production, because that incurs a big cost. Yeah. And that is a choice that you have to make. Is it worth that?
Yeah, it's always a discussion of, is it the same if we use lower SKUs, or does it act the same, does it have the same features? So that's why I love that most of the cloud vendors have like a development tier as well, which has like all the features, but then does not have all the scalability or mostly no SLAs. So it's for development purposes, but it mimics the actual stuff in production.
Yeah, and I think also educational wise, you also need to start. Do you also need the stuff up and running? Because with infrastructure as code, you do not need to have all these things constantly in place. Because the cloud has this promise of it's pay what you use, but in many cases it's pay what you provision. If you provision a virtual machine that's on and you do not use it, well, you just pay for it. It's not pay what you use, it's pay what you provision. And the same goes for a lot of other resources that if it's there, you start paying for it regardless of use.
And it fully depends on the architecture that you have, right? Did you lift and shift stuff from on-premises to the cloud? Then you will not get that many benefits from the cloud. It will probably be more expensive. If you look at one VM on premises and one VM in the cloud, both running all the time, then it will probably be cheaper on premises. If you have your data center tuned finally, then on one single VM or a number of exact the same VMs, the cloud will not give you any benefit.
No,
but there are so many ways that they do give benefits, because you can maybe turn them off in the weekend or at night.
Yeah.
And then those times you don't pay for them.
Yeah, and even better is maybe make some architectural changes to your application and start using resources that, for example, Azure Functions or
going serverless, so you actually only pay
serverless that you only pay when you incur. Not always. If you incur it 20 million times a day, probably not a good choice. But if you have this service that you trigger maybe 20 times a day, it's perfect for a function that is really only then you only pay that millicent when you incur the function.
But that's also it has to be owned by those dev teams. And what I often see when those teams move to the cloud, they like that they can create their own infrastructure and they can change things and they like the agility. But the same thing with DevOps, they don't have a clue about running stuff in production, so they need to learn about that. They also need to learn about the implications that costs. If they spin up more stuff, that it will cost more.
Yeah.
And that can run out of control. So I've seen so many times that teams had some performance issues and they just started upgrading their databases to a higher SKU and a higher SKU. And then it ran for a couple of months, and it became a bit slow again, and they just improved the SKU again to a higher level. Yeah, in the end, this will not scale, right? You need to look at the root cause in what is causing it, and maybe rewriting some code or re-architecting some stuff. And that is something that those teams really need to learn. That's not in their daily operandi, right?
No.
So
and I think that FinOps has a nice solution, or I don't know if it's a solution, but there is an approach to that. So in the FinOps handbook, they really talk about the diversification between spend. Like on usage basis, which is really into the teams, they can actually influence what is used within the cloud. And on the other end, there is rates. And rates is what you pay for a resource. For example, a VM, if you do a pay-as-you-go, you pay a certain amount. But if you have an enterprise subscription, or you have a commitment-based, like I'm really paying, I know that I will use this VM for 24 hours a day for the whole month, you can pay upfront and then you will get a discount. And there are many things that you can do in every cloud, like pay-as-you-go, commitment-based discounts, saving plans. There's all kinds of dev test subscriptions. So it's the same exact resource, but you will pay for it less because you have some contract negotiations or some agreements. And in FinOps, they say, okay, well, there's this usage part, which in this decentral teams, and the rate part is something that is negotiated. You can spread it out over multiple teams. So that is a typical something that you would maybe put into a central team, or at least a virtual central team that is looking at the rates in general. And that central team, and I'm talking about a central team, but again, this can be also a virtual team of people that are doing those roles. They also need to start creating the visibility. So if you are talking about the teams need to know what they are spending because they are owning it. Mm-hmm. They need to know what is theirs and what is their spend. So ownership is a very important thing within FinOps as well. And the first thing that you need to start investigating is how can I create ownership? So how can I make visible that costs belong to a product or a department or something that you choose to divide costs on?
Yeah, and that's often fairly easy when you have resources that belong to a certain team and it's only used by them. You also have a lot of bigger resources that are shared, and you also need to find a way to divide those costs of those resources, because otherwise everyone will start leaning on those shared resources again, and then you're back to square one where you have one big pile of shared costs.
So it's really important to especially with shared resources, because I saw it happening in a company where it was not as far mature that the shared resources were actually divided by the teams. So the shared resources for the teams were free. So what happened? Every single thing that the team needed to do, because they were responsible for their cost, so that was arranged. But the shared resources are free. So guess what? Who is going to run this workload? Well, the shared resource. Was it the best architectural choice? No. But it was free. So you need to be careful there, and you need to make an agreement. And a very simple thing can just be, we have this big Kubernetes cluster that is shared by 3 teams. We just divide the cost by 3.
That's the simplest way.
That is the simplest way. And if you want to do more, well, you can.
There's several tools also that can help you, especially in the Kubernetes world. There's a lot of tools that help you divide the load and actually measure who is using what. But those are even more advanced scenarios. I would, if you're starting with this, maybe just dividing by the number of teams that you have.
Number of teams, or find the unit that makes sense. If you have an event bus, count the number of events, and can you count the number of events that are from a certain team? And divide it by that. So it doesn't really matter as long as you start thinking about it and start
giving back those insights.
Show back is what they call it. Like first show back, show the teams what they are actually spending, and later maybe charge back in, okay, they have a fixed budget, and what the amount of money they spend in the cloud, they are charged back on that, on their budget, or they get back from it as their product makes more revenue, they get more back on that.
So one thing that I also want to focus on is that if you want to focus on cost, is talk to your business from a perspective of high availability and all those kind of requirements. What is actually needed? Because if you focus on things like high availability, disaster recovery, etc., those things make running your applications a lot more costly and also a lot harder to do. Also making changes is harder, and that's also like another form of cost, because it costs your employees time, which is also cost.
And I think that in here is also talk to your business about that. So like, is this really needed? But what is also important is that instead of giving them a budget, like, okay, we are going to lower your budget so that you have to reduce your cost, for example, that is maybe a fair point. But if you then really treat it as a budget, so next year your budget will be lower because you saved a lot of money. That's great. You are punished for your good behavior. So really make it also an incentive for those teams to start innovating. So instead of like getting the money forever, say, okay, the amount of money you spend on your budget, you can actually do something good with that. So do some innovation projects, do some research, try something out, or maybe even have some fun. But really give it back to the teams, keep the budget as is, because then there is also really an incentive to start investing the money in innovation, maybe choosing a complete new architecture, which even saves more money. So that is also the mind shift that we need to make, not focusing on only saving cost, because that is a not sustainable practice.
Yeah, and then so keeping the budget as a whole for a team, so the full budget with all their cost and cloud cost is one part of that, and if they save on that, that's a win for them. And they can spend it for building more features or whatever. Yeah, makes sense.
So I think more or less in the summarization of the thing. So this FinOps thing is really about, there's a movement to start looking better at cloud cost, cloud cost management, but it's more than that. It's not just putting some tools in place, putting some tagging in place to know who owns what, and then you're done. It's more than that. So FinOps is really about, a cultural shift as well, and really bringing it into your whole organization. So start by educating your teams so that they understand cost.
But also sharing knowledge about how teams saved cost. Like if a team moved to a serverless architecture, let them explain that we did this, the performance is the same or even better, and the costs are lower, or hey, we looked at the comparison between pay-as-you-go and we've committed to several machines for a longer period of time because we know that they will be used. So we save this cost. So that's an inspiration for other teams as well. Or certain tools to shut down stuff at night. Share those things with other teams so they can also learn from it.
Yeah. So that's really collaboration. They need to start making decisions based on data. So it's really important that you really get your data out of your cloud provider, putting into reports, making trend analysis. There are great tools for that. You can, there is already, of course, tools within the cloud provider itself, but there are also great third-party tools that you can use. Education, that everybody understands cloud cost and the impact of cloud cost. Starting to make reports and especially the timeliness of the reports, because like once a month is not so great because it's so volatile. And I think it's also important to start creating this centralized virtual team to really help with these more cross-cutting concerns, like how do we do rate negotiation, how do we deal with reporting across the board, how do we deal with shared resources, how do we bring into finance, etc., etc. And so that you can really take advantage of the flexibility of the cloud, because I think tying it back to where we started, the cloud costs that are incurred, that are rising. In most cases, it is because we are trying to build the data center in the cloud. And that is not what cloud is good at. Yeah,
I think it's a combination of that and the flexibility of the cloud that it has. It's so easy to create large VMs or large pieces of infrastructure and just let them run there in your dev environment. So there is also a very large part of waste in the cloud, and having those insights of we see this graph of our monthly spend, and since yesterday there's a big spike in it. Oh yeah, I did some tests with a very large database to see if it would improve our performance. Then you can have that conversation also with your business to see like, but is it actually worth this, or are there other ways to do this?
So maybe that's also a great takeaway for our listeners. Like, if you stop listening, take a look at your cloud spend, and there is a lot of waste. So is there anything running that you can just switch off now and already start saving cost. And well, while you're at it, maybe leave a little bit CO2 as well. While we're at it. So
those things go hand in hand, right? So I think it would be good that even if you think stuff is under control, once in a while just go and spend like half a day with your team to see if there's any abandoned stuff running, because that often is the case. And if you don't find anything, do it less often, but I will guarantee you the first couple of times you do this, you will notice a lot of stuff that might be dangling around somewhere that's not being used anymore.
Yeah, so if you do, let us know. We are very interested in that.
Yeah, with that, it's time to wrap up.
Yeah, so thank you for listening again, and hope you enjoyed it, and hope to hear you next time on the Lead Podcast.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Lead Podcast, a podcast for leaders in engineering, architecture, and development.